importing and exporting data. So as the internet and technology evolves and our businesses grow, it seems like we're doing a lot more integration with other systems and other people and other business partners. And data can come from a variety of different sources today. We can pull it out from older systems. We can pull it from the internet and the cloud. We can pull it from web services. So the possibilities are really becoming endless as far as where our data comes from. And on the flip side of that, we're sharing our data with a lot more businesses and people and the internet. So in this nugget, we're going to get familiar with the tools inside and outside of SQL Server that we can use to import, export, transfer, and copy data from a variety of different sources in a variety of different formats. So we'll start this nugget off with a look at importing and exporting data. Just talk about the process, get familiar with the tools and their capabilities, and we'll even go over some guidelines that we should follow before doing any sort of bulk operations. We'll then get familiar with the import and export wizard. We'll get over into the virtual Nugget Lab. We'll take a look at how to use the import and export wizard to transfer data and talk about some of the neat things that the import and export wizard can do, because it can really do some neat stuff. And it can really kind of do everything. But the fact that it's built on top of SSIS and you're really just making a package through a wizard opens up the avenue to learn SSIS. So if you want to learn SSIS, the import and export wizard is a great way to do it because you can see what it does by saving the package and then opening the package in SQL Server Data Tools and getting familiar with what it does. We'll then get familiar with some bulk operations. We'll talk about the transact SQL constructs such as bulk insert and open row set, a couple of statements we can use inside of SQL Server to work with data and bring it in to SQL Server. And then we'll take a look at just how to, a quick little segment here on how to use the select into, which is a great statement that we can use to copy data and make copies of tables. So when it comes to importing and exporting data, it's really going to come down to understanding your sources and your destinations. And that's all going to depend on your environment. Because if we're just simply pushing data around our own data center, our SQL servers will be able to see each other. So we could really just do a data transfer using SSIS or the import and export wizard. Pretty straightforward, especially if our source and our destination is SQL Server or an OLADB compliant database, as we call that. Another scenario, though, is say that we need to push our data out into a format that our business partners, vendors, or maybe even just the general public can see. Now, in that case, we may export it to a format that we've agreed upon with our vendors. Or if we're exporting out to the general public, we might use XML and publish a schema, which is just instructions on how the XML is formatted. Now, the other side of that equation is importing data. And importing data is always a little bit more difficult, especially if you're the destination, because now you have to map and fit this data into your world. And I can tell you from experience, I still to this day do quite a bit of data migration and conversion projects. And this side is really easy because you're just exporting data, which really just comes down to what data do you want to export, what format do you want to put it in, and where are you going to put it. Really easy to do. This side can get tricky because of this, because of the data, the source, where it's coming from. It could be simple, could be a flat file, text file, access database, could be an Excel spreadsheet. Those are all really easy to tap into, but it gets difficult when you work with older systems. And I've worked with a lot of older systems, old flat file ISAM databases that are proprietary, and finding a driver to tap into it is usually the most challenging part. But as long as you can find a way to tap into it, and there's lots of different ways, ODBC, OLADB, there's a lot of different drivers, and a little bit of Google research, you can usually end up finding a driver to tap into even the oldest systems. But once you do, then it's just a matter of mapping the data. Thankfully, we've got a lot of tools in SQL Server to help us get there when it comes to importing and exporting data. The first one here that we're going to look at is the import and export wizard. This is just a great tool all around. And it's really SSIS, SQL Server Integration Services. This wizard is essentially walking us through creating a package. But you never ever have to work with the package because it does it all behind the scenes. When you're done with the wizard, you hit finish, you can run it immediately, which just executes the package. And optionally at the end of the wizard, you can save it as a package in case you want to do it again or you want to learn more about SSIS. It's a great way that you can open up the package in SQL Server Data Tools and take a look at what it did. And just to plug SSIS here, the real beauty of SSIS is that it can do everything else too. Outside of just importing and exporting data, you have FTP tasks, email tasks, tasks for working with the file system, and there's a lot of third-party components out there that you can download to integrate new tasks in. I've worked with ones that have to deal with Amazon and web services. So really the possibilities are endless as far as where your data can come from and where you can put data and how you work with data within SSIS. But the Import Export Wizard built right into Management Studio makes it really easy to do any sort of data importing and exporting. We also have a utility known as BCP, the Bulk Copy Program. This is a command line utility, so it sits outside of Windows. We can access it from the operating system. And we can also use this to import, export data, and you can also use it to generate format files. Format files describe the columns, describes their data type, describes where their start and end points are, and you're really going to need format files for those fixed file formats. So, because with a fixed file format, you're really in control of where the column breaks are and where your line feeds are and all that stuff. So, if you're ever going to responsible for importing a fixed length file, you'll need to define those, and a format file will help do that. We also have bulk insert and open row set, a couple of transact SQL statements that we can use to bulk load data, to bring in data from an outside source, an outside file. And I'll actually show you how to use bulk insert with a format file that we generate with BCP, so you can see how that process works. And at the end here, we'll take a look at select into, just really a super handy utility statement that we can use to copy data from one table to another table. We can create a table on the fly using select into, and then our source can be a query. So really, we could take data from many tables and make a new table out of it, whatever. But it's just a great little statement to get the hang of, because it's useful in so many situations when you just need to quickly make a copy of a data set, put it into your own table to work with. Super easy and handy to work with, or even if you need to make a backup of a table. Now, a couple of guidelines to follow when you're bulk loading. Bulk meaning you're loading a lot of data. These guidelines will help improve performance and decrease the chance of coming across an error. So the first thing you should do if you're bulk loading is turn your recovery model to the bulk logged recovery model. That will help keep our transaction log in check. We won't bloat the transaction log, and we'll get a performance boost from not doing that. Also, disable any triggers or constraints. These constraints can cause an error, especially if you're loading a lot of data. You're bound to violate a constraint somewhere along the line, and that'll just stop the whole process and you'll have to start it over again. So disable constraints ahead of time. Triggers, especially if you're doing things like loading other tables, or if you're doing crazy stuff like sending emails or whatever, you could really get into a big mess there. So make sure you disable your triggers and constraints before doing a bulk load. And then indexes. Indexes, if they're on there, they're going to get extremely fragmented from loading all of this data. So remove them. And when you're done, reapply them. Re-add your indexes, re-enable your constraints and triggers, and turn your recovery model back to full or simple. So those will all make sure that your bulk load processes, your importing of data, goes smooth. All right, let's head over to the Virtual Nugget Lab and get familiar with some of these tools and import and export some data. All right, so we're in the Virtual Nugget Lab. I have Management Studio open down here. Let's fire it up. And I've added a new project into our solution for the series called 16-Import Export. And we're going to start here with the Import and Export Wizard. So let's get another connection in Object Explorer, this time over to our Eval2 instance. So we'll hit Connect. And what we're going to do is we're going to take our Nugget Demo DB. We have our sales archive table. And on our eval instance, there's 500,000 rows in this table. But on our Eval2 instance, we have our sales archive table. There are 0 rows. So let's say that we wanted to transfer the data from one instance to another in the same table. How can we do that? Well, we can use the Import and Export Wizard pretty easily. Just right-click on a database, head into Tasks, and choose Import or Export Data. So let's choose Export. And either one, import or export, will bring up our import and export wizard. So we'll just choose next at the first screen. This is where we choose our source. And when you choose your source, and because we right-clicked on our Nugget Demo DB and chose export, it automatically configured the instance and the database. But if you drop down your source, here are all the drivers that we can use to connect to specific databases. So we can connect using the .NET framework to ODBC, Oracle, SQL Server. We can choose a flat file source. So if we want to connect to a CSV or a text file, we can do that. We also have an Access database, Excel. We can tap in then to OLADB providers. So ODBC, OLADB providers, common providers here for tapping into a variety of different data sources. So we're actually going to choose the SQL Server native client because we're going from SQL Server to SQL Server. You can choose your authentication, pick your database, and choose next. Same thing with our destination. You can choose where this data is going. And you can mix and match all of these. You know, if you want to take data from SQL Server, pipe it into Microsoft Access, we can do that. Into Excel, we can do that. Into an analysis services or Oracle database, we can do it. So very flexible as far as what we can use. And this is, again, where SSIS will shine because there's a lot more providers that you can choose from. Not only that, but you can easily download and install providers into your operating system, and they'll become available for us to work with. So if you wanted to work with a FoxPro database, for instance, you can go download a FoxPro driver, and it'll show up in here that we can then work with as a data source. So here, let's just go ahead and instead, if I drop this down, it may take a little bit to enumerate the network here, but hey, why not? We'll do it anyway. So we'll use the SQL browser service here to find all the instances available to us on the network, and it'll give it to us in a nice list. Could also just type it in. But we're going to do the same thing. This time we'll choose our destination being our eval2 instance, and then our database again here will be our Nugget Demo DB. So here we go. Let's choose eval2. And now if we drop down database, it'll enumerate all the databases on that instance. Let's choose Nugget Demo DB. And now our source and our destination are all set. Now, if we hit next, it's just a matter of choosing what data do we want to copy from our source to our destination. So we can directly copy tables, or you can write a query. Here's what a query looks like, and you can parse it. If you have a script out there, you can load it in here. Let's hit back. We're just going to choose copy data from one or more tables or views. If we hit next, it'll enumerate all of the tables and the views on the server. And so we have our source on the left and our destination on the right. So let's put a check mark here next to Sales Archive. That'll automatically hook us into the Sales Archive table on the destination. You can also type in your own table here, and it'll create that table on the fly. So that's another way that you can create a table out of thin air using the data from our table and our source. You can also drop this down and choose other tables if you want to map to them. And then another neat thing you can do here, you can preview the data. You can see exactly what the data looks like here on the source, as it's showing us the source here. And you can also hit edit mappings. So this will show us our mapping. So in here you can change your mappings. You can also ignore certain fields. So if you're mapping to and from tables that are different versions, maybe you have extra columns in one table that aren't in another, then you can ignore those columns going over. You also can see your data types, nullable properties, and then you can also choose what you want to do at the destination table. If you want to delete the rows that are already there, if you want to append the rows, and then you also can enable identity insert for auto numbering. So we'll hit OK here. Everything looks good. Hit OK here, and now we'll choose Next. So this is the screen that prompts us do we want to save this as a package. That way we can work with it later. We can reschedule it. We can alter it, edit it, whatever we want to do. So if you don't save the package, I say, and you choose Run Immediately, you're done. It's just going to take us to the summary where we can finish, and it'll run it and then discard the package. If you do hit Save Package, you can choose where you want to save the package. You can put it on the file system, you can put it in a SQL Server, and then any sensitive data, connection strings and such, you can choose what to do with it. Encrypt it, don't save it in the package at all. And if you don't do that, what I like to do, and a lot of people I see do, is they won't save it in the package, but they'll reference it inside of a configuration file, which is just an XML file full of properties that you can then, put in a secure location. So that way you have a nice centralized place to manage all your package configuration files, and they're not stored inside of the package. So we'll just leave this with the default, and if I hit Next here, because we said save the package to a SQL instance, it's going to have us give it a name, a description, the target here is SQL Server, and then specify what SSI instance you want to save the package to. Otherwise, you can also specify the file system, and then you just put where you want to put it on the file system, which makes it really easy then to open up SQL Server Data Tools, create a new SQL Server Integration Services project, and import the package. Then you can start working with it in the designer. Now, for us, though, we just want to run this import and export task, so we'll just choose Run Immediately. We'll hit Next. We'll hit Finish. And now it's going to run through and copy all 500,000 rows. So it's done. It took a little bit there to transfer 500,000 rows, but it did it. And the nice thing about using the import and export wizard is you have a nice interface here that you can actually watch the import and export happen. Not only that, but if an error occurs, this will all turn red, and then you'll get a message that you can click to get a detailed information of why it failed. But it's good. Everything looks good here. So let's hit Close. And now we can head into our databases and our Nugget Demo DB. And we can right click, let's go to properties just to make sure the data made it in here. And there we go, we've got 500,000 rows in here now where we had 0 before. So one thing I didn't do, I didn't take my own advice and drop our indexes, disable our constraints and our triggers, turn our recovery model to bulk log. I didn't do it on purpose though, so no worries, right? Because we'll do it the right way when we get into our bulk insert statements. But let's take a look at what that did to our indexes. So let's right click on our product ID index, head into properties, head into fragmentation. Whoa, look at that. We're 99% fragmented. That's not good. So we've just totally crushed our indexes, loading 500,000 rows into this table without thinking about our indexes ahead of time. So this is the reason right here you want to drop your indexes and then recreate them. So we'll do that the right way here shortly. So Now what I want to do is just truncate this table. So let's head in, let's create a new query, and let's just truncate this table. Let's get the data out of it completely here. What is this table? Sales archive? Yeah, sales archive. If I can type. There we go. Okay. So now we're back to 0 rows in this table. If we go to properties, head into storage, we're good to go. 0 rows. So the table's empty. What we're going to do now is work with BCP. So let's open up our bcp.sql script here. And so BCP command line utility we can use to do a lot of this stuff. And what we're going to do first here is export data. Then I'll show you how to import data. And then we'll generate a format file that we'll use when we get it into our bulk.sql scripts here and learn how to work with bulk insert. So BCP, easy tool to get the hang of. When you're exporting data, just do a BCP followed by your query, followed by query out, then specify where the data is going, and you can also specify here what server you're going to and to use trusted authentication. And the C here means do it all in character data. You can also do native mode, which will try to pipe it out in the actual data type that it is. So let's fire up the command line. I'm just going to go to start, and we'll type in CMD down here to get the command line up. And now let's just paste in. I have this this exact export statement here for BCP copied to the clipboard. And by the way, just to show you here, if we type in BCP, you can get some help. Here's all the switches that we can use. Let me copy ours in here. So I'll edit, paste. Here it is. So again, BCP followed by the query, followed by query out, which is going to output the results of that query into our file here, sales_archive-bcp.txt. We're going to do this from our SQL Nugget Lab SQL 2012 eval instance. So the instance we were originally taking data out of, we're going to use a trusted connection, so it's going to use the security credentials that I'm currently logged into Windows as, and then it's going to treat all the data as character data. So let's hit enter, and you can see it's very quick using BCP. So that's one reason to use BCP. It's way faster than SSIS. So if we head down to our support files directory and open up our 16-import export directory for this nugget, there's our file. 24 megs, 500,000 rows of all of our sales archive data. And be wary of opening up Notepad or files in Notepad, data files that contain hundreds of thousands of rows, because you'll be sitting there for a little bit before it fully opens. All right, so now let's take that file and let's import it. So I have the BCP command copied into the clipboard here. I'm just going to paste it in here and let's analyze what we're doing. So now we're just reversing it. Now we're telling BCP what table we want to put the data into. So we have our table name, we have the in keyword followed by the file to where the data is coming from, path to the file where the data is coming from there, followed by our security credentials. Again, S is what server, T is trusted connection, and C is working with treating everything as character data here. So if we hit enter, this time it'll send the rows into our database, and there we go, good to go. Now, while we're in the bulk copy program here, let me show you how to make a format file, because we're going to be using that shortly when we get over to our bulk insert statements. So I once again have on the clipboard our command for making a format file. Same thing, BCP. This time we specify what table we want to build the format file on. So this will scan the table and create the format file based on the columns and their data types. So we also specify the keyword format. We can do a -F to specify the path to the format file. Microsoft recommends we do this in XML. A lot more support for it. It'll guarantee that it lasts longer into the future here. So do a .xml, specify a -X. That switch will ensure that it's output in XML format. Then just specify your credentials, and then optionally a -C here, which will make sure everything's character data. You can also do a -N for native, which will then use the actual data types of the columns. So let's hit enter. That'll create the format file. So let's head down into our directory, and there it is, salesarchive-format.xml. If we open this up, here's what a format file looks like. So the first part here, the record XML chunk, is determining the fields themselves, the columns in the file, the format of the file, what our column terminator is, and our row terminator. So really what this means here is that our first field in the file is going to be a maximum length that's 12 characters, so that's all it'll end up consuming. We'll know the column ends with a tab. That's what a /T is a tab. And then here's where we just specified everything's a character. All the columns are treated as character fields because we chose that. If we would have did native, it would have matched these up to actual types that are in line with the field itself. And at the end here, we also have the actual terminator on the entire row, which is going to be a line break. And then the row XML chunk down here just determines the names of all of our columns and their types. So that's it. That's it for a format file. Just gives a little direction as far as how the data is laid out and the type of data that is stored in the column. So let's minimize our directory, let's minimize our BCP, and let's take a look at how to bulk load data from the file we just created using BCP. So let me go ahead and hide Solution Explorer so we can get a little more screen real estate here. So using bulk insert, very simple, very straightforward, as long as what we're doing here is that our sales archive table matches the fields and the mappings, meaning they're in the same order as our file. So that makes it very easy, much like using BCP. The only difference here is that we're doing it inside of Transact SQL and using a statement. So I emptied out our sales archive table, totally empty. Now if we run the statement, it should do a fairly fast job like BCP of importing all 500,000 rows. And there it is. That was pretty quick and straightforward. So bulk insert is pretty much exactly like BCP with the in switch thrown into it, because you can really only work with data and bring it in to SQL Server specifically. With the open row set function, you can actually tap into any OLEDB compliant data source. So if you can tap into it through OLEDB, you can hit it from open row set, and this includes going through a linked server to get at data. So first here, let's go ahead and let's just truncate our table because we put a bunch of data into it. So we'll just highlight that, hit execute, looks good. I'll undo that. There we go. All right, so we're empty again in our sales archive table. So now with open row set, we're just going to specify insert, name of our table, then we can select star from open row set. This time we're still going to go from a file. We'll import it from our BCP file that we've been working with. But here we can also specify a format file. So keep in mind when you use the open row set function, you always have to alias it. That's why the T's on the end here. But here we're just specifying the path to our format file. We've got the path to our actual data file. Now if we execute this, it should use the format file with the data file to bring all 500,000 rows into our sales archive table. And there we go. Now if we really wanted to do this right, we would be disabling our constraints triggers, switching to bulk log recovery model, and dropping our indexes. This sales archive table we've been working with on eval 2 is completely hammered right now. Its log file is 2 gigs in size because it's got the full recovery model, so everything we've been doing has been a logged operation. Our indexes are all crushed at 90+% fragmentation, and thankfully we don't have any constraints or triggers, otherwise we'd probably have trouble loading the data. So here's what we can do. We can alter our database, set our recovery bulk logged with no way it'll do it right away. We can also then alter our table and put a no check on all the constraints, which will disable any constraints. It won't check them. We can disable all the triggers in one shot here, doing a disable trigger all on our table. And then we can drop each index individually. Now, one thing you'll notice is one index I'm not dropping is our clustered index. And there's one thing you can do to avoid messing with your clustered index, and that is if the data going into this table is sorted by the key, then you'll be okay. You won't get any fragmentation. Your clustered index will be fine. And that's why I had the order by clause. If you noticed here, I had the order by clause on our query when piping the data out. So that'll make sure that our cluster index key is in order, and it'll stay in order as the data is going in to the data pages. So that's one little trick you can do. And so this will do all of that. So if we execute this, there we go. So now if we take a look at our indexes and we refresh here, they should all be gone except our clustered index. Perfect. And if we right click and go to properties of the database here, just want to look at the recovery model, make sure we got flipped to our full recovery model, or bulk logged recovery model. There we go. We're good to go. And then all of our constraints and triggers, which we don't have any, are completely disabled. So now we could reload the data. And just to be sure here, let me just get rid of the data that's already in there that we just loaded up. Okay, we're good to go. So let's do that again. Let's load the data. This time it should go a lot faster too, because we no longer have indexes. We're in the right recovery model, and so to load 500,000 rows should be a breeze. And there we go, not too bad. So now let's do the opposite. Oh, we need to scroll down here. The opposite would be to alter our database and set our recovery model back to full, then re-enable all of our check constraints by doing a check. Then, we actually want to enable trigger all, there we go, instead of disable. And then we'll just recreate all of our indexes. All right, so let's highlight all of this code going down, hit execute. And it'll take a little bit to create all of our indexes. That's really where most of the time is going here, but that wasn't too bad. See, not too bad at all. We're good to go. So now our tables, back to where it was, only all of our indexes are fresh, non-fragmented. Our log file is still intact and small because we're in the bulk recovery model. Now we're back to full. So that's really the best way to do it when you're doing bulk loading operations. Now the last thing I want to show you is how to use the select into to make copies of table or to create a brand new table with all the data we're importing. So select into, really easy to get the hang of. It's really just a select star into your destination table from your source table. So here we're just going to make a copy of our sales archive table and name the table sales archive 2. So let's highlight all this. We'll switch our database NuGet Demo DB and make a copy of our table with 500,000 rows in it. So if we refresh our tables, there we go. We've got a copy of the table. Now the only thing in here is it only copied the data in the structure. No indexes or constraints or triggers, anything like that. Literally just the data and the columns and their data types. Another powerful way to use select into is to make a brand new table based on the data that we're importing. So here we're using the open row set function to bring in a file, use a format file, and create a brand new table from it. So if we execute this, take a little bit longer than just copying data from one table to another, but still pretty neat that we can do this. And there it is. So now if we refresh, there is Sales Archive 3 that we created on the fly from data stored in our data file. All right, so in the CBT Nugget, we got familiar with importing and exporting data. We started off with an overview to get familiar with the importing and exporting process, understand what sources and destination and file formats are all about. And we also got familiar with the tools that we can use in SQL Server to import, export, migrate, transfer, and copy data. Then we jumped into the virtual Nugget Lab and got familiar with how to work with all these tools. We saw the SQL Server import and export wizard, a great way to specify your source and your destination and really create an SSIS package on the fly to do it for us. We then got familiar with BCP to import data, export data, and also to create a format file. We got familiar with the bulk insert and the open row set function. Open row set, we use that format file to import the data. And at the end, we got familiar with the select into statement, a great statement that we can use to copy data or create tables on the fly to bring our data in from an external source. I hope this has been informative for you, and I thank you for viewing.